Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of One Vision, the FinTech Fuse. This is Theo, your host for the episode. Joining us today across the other side of the ocean is Aditi Subbarao, Global Financial Services Lead from Instabase, and someone I had the fortunate chance to meet with in person in New York. So, welcome to the show, Aditi.
Thank you so much, Theo. I love meeting you in person, and now it's great to be here talking to you again virtually.
I
Thanks
know.
for
I can get used to this. I'm like getting my monthly actually, you know what? It has been. I'm getting my monthly conversation with you. We need to make it a
that's
habit.
good. We should make exactly, and we should make sure it keeps happening as well.
Yes, yes, yes. I just loved so for those of you who are listening or watching, we met at Finovate Fall in New York, and Didi presented her vision of AI, generative AI in financial services. And let's just say, and I said it in person, I'm just going to repeat it. Your session was thoughtful, it was amazing, and you're one of the most prepared person I have ever met. And that time that you spent with us, even though it was short, it was insightful and I loved it. So thank you so much for, sharing your time so graciously and everything that you do with us. I truly do mean that. It was one of my most enjoyable moments for the track for, gosh, the last 5, 6 years. So
That's so kind of you, Theo. Thank you. I mean, obviously, I was fangirling on having met you in person, and then hearing that high praise from you, it's just completely made my month. So thank you.
you made the event, period. That was you. So tell us a little bit more about what you do at Instabase. I'm very curious because just listening to how you talk, I'll be like, wait a minute, where have you been? And you know so much, but what exactly do you do at the company?
So I love my job. I wear two different hats at the moment. So one is I lead our financial services industry vertical. I've spent quite a few years working within banks myself, and I love being able to solve the problems that I understand. So I help my company build the right solutions, build the right technology to be able to offer our financial services customers what they actually need. And the second hat that I have taken on recently is to build out our strategic partnerships ecosystem. And especially as generative AI unfolds, it's becoming very obvious that the usage and applications in financial services are no longer constrained to specific workflows or specific business lines. It is a much more overarching kind of application. And it's not something that one single provider can solve for. So you have to work in tandem with different technologies, different systems, different solutions. And in order to orchestrate that, system integrators or consulting companies are quite instrumental in that front to end design process. So I'm looking to build out that ecosystem for Instabase as well.
I keep hearing a lot of that lately is how all the different parts and pieces fit together,
Mm.
almost like the ecosystem. I think that was the perfect word. I just came from a conference recently where the first thing that we saw on stage was all the logos for the partners, because sometimes
Right.
that's how many it takes, right, to make something work. Um, it's fascinating to watch. And then the other part of me, it's like, ooh, the more people that you have in there, the more chances that things might go wrong. This is like, the risk side of me, right? I'm very risk averse when it comes to system implementation. I'm like, oh my God. All right. So you need to have all of these things to work. You need to have a cook in the middle to
Yeah.
hurt the cats, for lack of better
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
Um, and then when we think about something as financial services industry, which is highly regulated, where we're dealing with money, where we have no room for error. And it's a little bit dicey sometimes when you think about all the third party risks that you're bringing into the system.
Mm.
So, with that being said, seeing how the ecosystem is expanding and seeing all the different players that are coming in to create what we need, it looks easier putting them on a PowerPoint presentation than it actually is. One of the things I often hear from bank is we don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
And because once you open up the hood, you're like, oh, wait, I have all these things I need to put together. So, what would you advise them? Like, where should they start? How should they even start? And what are some of the common things that they need to make sure they avoid?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's two threads there that you brought up, Theo. The first one is almost too many cooks. And are we kind of spoiling the broth that way? And then the second one is, with consideration to that, when you start off on your AI journey, what should you be looking out for? And to address the first point, I think, especially these days, financial services organizations are doing so much more than just what one might term traditional banking functions. You're no longer just taking deposits and lending money. You are doing so many other different aligned functions, all in the traditional side as well, where you're making payments, you're doing investing, you're managing pensions, you're doing insurance coverage. Like all of that sits within a large multinational universal bank. But at the same time, you are also then trying to embed yourself a lot more in your customers' day to day life. You are trying to be the provider of a credit card. You are trying to be like the embedded finance tool at the back end when they book their travel. Like you're trying to become uh, im- as intrinsic in day to day life as possible. Now, considering that breadth of things, a bank cannot do it all in an expert manner. You have to partner with different providers, different specialists on those different things. The second thread across that topic is the risks that you are facing. Exactly like you said, you're very risk averse. So if you look at risk from a slightly different lens, it's the risk that the bank is trying to fight against is getting so much more complex, because obviously the more types of customers you serve, the more geographies you operate in, and the more products you offer, the more different types of risks you are expected to safeguard, not just your own business but also each of your customers from. And fighting that battle is not a single warrior's job. Like you need a team of Avengers standing next to you with their own superpowers. So I almost think, in spite of the fact that it is really hard to make this complicated mechanism work perfectly, and obviously things fail, you have points of failure all the time, but the choice of going alone doesn't exist anymore. You have to do it together, and then you have to figure out a way of making that work. So that's my take on the first piece. The second piece, though, is more interesting. It's like, what should you ask yourself when you are starting off on that journey? And I think the last 2 years have been a really encouraging period where people have finally gotten off the fence and thinking of whether or not I should, is it right, is it safe, is it not? I think most banks and financial institutions have now realized that the whether or not is not a question anymore. Of course, yes, you have to go ahead, you have to do it, you have to adopt AI. And then the other thing also is not, well, maybe I'll test it out now, figure out what I want to do in 3 years. Well, no, like you should have done it yesterday. So even that is becoming increasingly clear across the market. If you look at McKinsey's global survey, for example, they've said that AI adoption has increased from 55% of the respondents they surveyed to 72% just in the last 10 months. So I think those numbers are very encouraging. But if I were a bank starting off on this relatively afresh, I think the most important question is why. And this is not, again, this is not the why from the point of view of should I or should I not, but it is, what is the driving reason that I'm doing it? Because what we keep seeing across the industry is that more and more institutions are doing it just to keep up with the Joneses. It's like, this other competitor in the market has done it, therefore I have to do it. Or if I don't do it, I'll be left off, which is a very valid reason, but that's not reason enough. And then the third thing is, my customers are expecting me to do it. I just need to put out marketing material that shows how cool I am, and therefore I'm going to do it. And again, that's not good enough. So I think it is the first step, and it's really extremely important to find what the core standalone why for your own organization is. And it may well be very different from your competitors. It may well be very different from every other bank that does what you do. But find what that is and agree with your leadership team, with your stakeholders, with your board on what that is. In some cases, it might be, well, you need to tidy up your balance sheet. It might be you need to grow in a certain market. You need to do a better customer experience. Otherwise, you'll get eaten up by the challengers. It doesn't matter what it is. Figure it out and agree on it across the organization. I think that's the first question. The second part is the where. So once you know what your why is, find where in your organization you can start adopting AI to help that why. So again, for example, if you've decided that improving customer experience is your why, then don't just adopt a bunch of chatbots and fire all of your customer service people, right? Because you're not really serving your why that way. So figure out which areas, which functions are going to influence that why, and within that, then find the specific use cases or the business processes or the client journeys and data journeys that will aid it, and then start applying there. And I think just to add one kind of subset within that where, then the who and the how also becomes important, because the who is so critical, especially in generative AI style adoptions, because the very nature of the technology means that there are multiple stakeholders who are involved. You have the business who's going to see the outcomes, you have technology, you have IT, you have completely newly created organizational structures around AI teams and chief data and AI officers and so on. And what you don't want happening is people just finger pointing at each other like that Spider-Man meme, where nobody really knows who's accountable at the end. So figuring out who is ultimately responsible and who's actually going to push this through is really important. And the last piece we kind of spoke about is the how, which is basically together with the right partners, with the right teams that are all going to do it. So I think like these are the sort of questions that I would start off addressing for any organizations coming on the AI journeys.
I feel like that could be a Harvard Business use case because you explain it so succinctly, the why, the where, the who, and the how. It makes so much sense. Yet we often see organizations coming out and say, well, everyone is doing it exactly like you say, right? FOMO. So we need to do something. We don't exactly know what.
Yeah,
Let's just do something.
yeah,
And I don't think that's doing justice for two things. One is that's really not a good way to get sustained results. And second thing is, then what happened afterwards? Like, oh, well, this doesn't work, or, you didn't put the right thought behind exactly where it will make the most sense for you to get the wins and build up on it. And, it's not doing it justice either because the technology can do so much more if we are being thoughtful about it. Which brings me to the second question, because there was a report, actually quite a few of those I read recently. Gartner, for example, they said almost half or more than half of the projects when they start a POC, they have to abandon it. It didn't
mm,
get all the way through. And then I think another report that came out from one of the big firms said, well, a third of them don't even get to fruition. So it seems like, yes, 8 and 10 FIs are actively exploring how we can do POCs. Not all of them are able to move past the pilot stage to production. So,
yeah,
what are some of the things that they need to consider to actually scale it? Because testing it, right? Finding a use case for it, getting the team together, getting agreement, and getting the first step, that's a great first step. But how do we continue the journey forward?
yeah. I think that's a great question. And I'm actually going to address that more from the generative AI perspective rather than the broader AI perspective. If you looked at, or had you asked me this question, say maybe a year ago, my answer would have been different. That answer would have been that most banks and most organizations are still very concerned around data security and privacy, especially once they start using large language models from external providers for those Gen AI projects. And that concern led to a whole lot of pilots and testing and exploration, as you said. But most of the use cases that we were being solved for were use cases that could be clubbed under the innovation category. And what I mean by that is people were using summarization for research reports or producing marketing content and things like that. It was peripheral use cases more often than not on public data. But to make a difference and to move the needle at a regulated financial institution, you need to go to the business as usual use cases, which invariably will deal with data which is either customer data or trade data, which is confidential, or even PII style data. And people were extremely reluctant, with good reason, to address those use cases. Now, the good thing is, over the course of last year, that concern around sharing data with a large language model has been addressed in multiple different ways. You have better technology, you can run models within your firewalls, you also have better regulation, you have providers of open source models who are creating guardrails around data sharing. So I think that concern has gone down a little, but the aftermath of that has still not finished yet. So that's one aspect. But I think the second part of it, which is what we are now struggling with, is much more structural. And I think that is going to take longer to overcome. And that has everything to do with data. So if you think of data across enterprises or large FIs, there are three big problems to large scale enterprise level AI usage, which is, the first one is that when you interact with that data, you need different modes of activating it. And what I mean by that is, you consider any use case in financial services, you take onboarding, you take loan origination, you take investing. The way the bank or the FI interacts with it can be multiple different types. So, for example, you'll have a bunch of loan applications coming into your back office with pay slips and bank statements and multiple different attachments. You're going to have to extract huge volumes of data at scale very fast from that, almost in a repetitive manner. That's a very different way of using AI from then saying, I have my audit team or my compliance team who are going to look into specific applications to make sure that I have lent according to my underwriting policy, to make sure that I have not discriminated through my decisions. That might be more of a conversational style usage. And then you might then have your relationship managers or your salespeople who then look across all of the data that they have and say, how many of my customers have actually borrowed for single family homes in Chicago? Or you might say, how many of my how much of my exposure comes from loan to value ratios of above 80%? And that is again a much wider search style interaction. And the problem is, there are solutions that FIs have adopted which sit in each one of these categories. But to do an end to end transformation of a particular data journey, you need to have them all talking to each other and going together. And I think that hasn't been solved for yet. So that's one constraint. The second one sort of fits into this, which is that the data itself that they need to understand and then automate or transform or process is really complex data, which technology is not capable of taking care of. So 80% of data within enterprises is unstructured. You might have it coming as PDF attachments, as Excel sheets, as pictures of like somebody's random selfie. Like, there's so many different formats of data that existing technologies find really hard to comprehend and understand the right way. Like financial statements and tables is a classic example of that. And solving that is still proving a significant challenge for most technologies still within banking. And then the last piece I'll say is that, as with any large enterprise, and especially more so in FIs, the data just lives in so many different places. You'll have like email attachments in the account of an employee who left 10 years ago. You'll have shared folders. You'll have something living on an S3 bucket. You'll have something in an Azure blob. I have literally seen customers walk out from vaults with Iron Mountain cardboard boxes with paper in them, which has contracts they need to read from. So it's like, oh my goodness, this is a huge mess. So you need to figure out how to be able to access all of that data, and something which is truly agnostic to storage location that can then help you get it all together and then create a process which accesses, processes, and like derives insights from that data. So I think these are the three big challenges. But the most frustrating part here, all of these have solutions. Like if you know what challenge you're facing, there are solutions that you can tackle that. The thing that really, really disappoints me is that banks use this as an excuse. The number of customers that we've heard say, I need to first tidy up my data estate before I can adopt AI. And I'm like, no, have you heard of the concept of using diamond to cut diamond? AI can help you tidy up your data estate. So it's almost like there are AI tools out there that you can use to clean up your data, to extract that data, to process unstructured data, which can then be passed on to either like a data lake or some consolidated database. And then once you have it there, you can then use other AI on top of it to be able to draw insights and to start actions further from it. So the way I see it is none of these are excuses. Like just take the decision that you're going to do it and then go ahead and find the solutions to do it. Sorry, that's a little bit of my my strong feelings on this coming through. But yeah, I'm a strong believer in data is not really a problem. It is something that can easily be, not easily, but something that can definitely be taken care of.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you use the word excuse, right? It's easy to find many reasons on why we can't do something, but it's much harder to actually sit down, agree on what you need to do, to your previous point, how you're going to go about doing it, and agree on even like this is the end goal you want. I've used this example quite often as someone told me they don't want to be the first CEO to lose money, right, of a bank. I mean,
Yeah,
you don't want that. You have your legacy in there.
yeah,
Stick with it, patch what you can, and let someone else worry about it. And
yeah.
it's funny because it reminds me so much of what I went through in my telco days for 20 years. We had so many different data sources everywhere, copy of customer everywhere. Because you need something, oh, quick, no, I don't have time to build all of these. So just pop a quick database. And before you know it, you end up with 10, 12 copies of the same customer data, just in different forms. And then you're like, oh, wait, now I need to create a whole layer to bring everything back together. Okay. So the challenge is universal. I think the mindset, unfortunately, is also common. So work to be done, my friend. And it brings brings us straight to the next question I wanted to ask, because it feels like a lot of the times when we talk about artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence, we often end up with the topic of data, right? You mentioned this, copies of data, how we can make sense of the data, what do we do with the data, what can we do with this wonderful resource that we have that we can touch yet we can't use.
Hmm.
And I've heard people talk about data as the fuel. It powers the brain, and the brain is the algorithm in the age of AI. There's no lack of data. Um, and I think one of the big questions we have right now is how do we treat, you talk a little bit about privacy and security, or even data sharing across borders,
Hmm. Hmm.
demarcation, data sovereignty. That seems like that's another question that's coming to play, especially in the last few years when we start talking about cloud, right? And then we saw a big pullback that says, whoa, wait a minute, this particular set of data cannot leave the boundaries of the country, or it
Yeah.
cannot leave this, and it needs to be here, it needs to be there. What do you think the future will hold? Are we going to all go back to where we were before? Um,
I this is such a tricky question, isn't it? Because it's almost like we're building like these super fast race cars, and then we're saying, oh, by the way, you can't drive on the track, just stay in your backyard and like go figure it out. I'm like, oh, that completely defeats the purpose. But I think it is, especially when you want to weigh out the benefits of innovation and the value that you can get from joined up AI application, yet with safety. it is a huge seesaw. And I also think that is because the accrual of the benefits is misaligned. So the people who are sharing the data need to be the people who are accruing the benefits of that AI. And until FIs can figure that out, we're not going to get this balance right. And what I mean for that is by that is that there are entire populations and entire emerging markets that are sharing their data, giving up their data without actually seeing improvement in the products and services they're getting from their FIs, without even having access to some of the products that they should have access to, and so on. So I think there is that one big imbalance which needs to be addressed. The second piece of it is twofold. It's almost like data itself is being created at a much more rapid pace than it was ever before. Like, can you imagine every time I ask ChatGPT, like, write me a silly kitten poem or like generate for me a picture, we're creating multiples of data than we had ever before. And then ultimately, it becomes my responsibility to make sure I'm safeguarding and protecting that data, or even knowing that that data about me exists. So I think that is going to become a bigger problem. Individuals are going to get a lot more aware of the fact that they own their data and that data can be misused, or that they can leverage or benefit that data. So I think that awareness is definitely going to go up. I do think we'll also start seeing more regulation coming in. So just like we had GDPR and regulation in California and so on, I think across markets, just like we are having AI regulation, more focus on data regulation will start coming in. But the one piece which I think will be the most challenging to solve is the cross border question. And that cannot be done unless you have three pieces working together, which is the pure technological capability of being able to move that data, share that data, encrypt it in transit and at rest, and all of that. So there needs to be enough technological advancement to do it the right way with the right access controls and security guardrails around it. The regulators and local jurisdictions will have to set aside all of their geopolitical considerations and make that more seamless, which I don't think is ever going to happen, but like we need that too. And then the last piece is an understanding from the people who store and hold that data, which is essentially the cloud providers, most of them, to realize that that's one piece they need to do in collaboration, not in competition. And unless these three things work in tandem, uh, I think that question is still going to be sort of pulling the horse back with the reins of data sharing.
So in 5 years, when we sit together for a drink in London, we'll still be talking about the same
We'll
question.
be talking about it. It's so
That's
sad, but I
that.
think it's true.
No, I think you're absolutely right, right? With a lot of things, I see that technology can bring a lot of promise. The challenge is not in writing the code. The challenge is people. The challenge is intention. The
Exactly.
challenge is, do we even have the will to want to do something? Because at the end of the day, you start looking at this, it almost feels like a lot of things, it just makes sense. It's common sense. Why wouldn't we do that? And then humans get in the way, or geopolitical tension get in the way, or something else. It's always something else. It's not the tech that's the problem.
Yes.
It's something else around it. Um, and unfortunately, I don't think that is something that a piece of code can solve. But we can always try. We can always try. Shared
And
value.
the more people who think that way, hopefully that movement grows and then it'll get to the right places and the right decision makers. Well, one can always hope, like you say.
Oh, we can ask our kids to do that. Like, oops, sorry. All right, we got us as far as we can now. Kids, go pick it up. I mean, one day they need to, migrate from like little Duplo to like bigger pieces and, bigger pieces. So this is perfect learning curve. All right, I deviate. I digress. So I do. So one of the things I often think about when I look at reports, right? When I see all these amazing reports that talk about all these companies that's doing amazing things. Actually, just recently, I had a whole LinkedIn discussion with someone else on that same topic. We take a step back and we look at who are the big players that are doing a lot of the innovation, a lot of the action, a lot of the testing and the implementation and learning. And I
Hmm.
keep seeing similar faces, familiar faces and logos. I keep
Mhm.
seeing, the bigger firms, right? The JPMs of the world, the BFAs of the world that have access to the data and the resources, the talent
Yeah.
to go and try. And then on the flip side of it, I see, OpenAI, Microsoft, I see Google, I see Meta, I see Apple. Again, similar story. The bigger ones that have access again to the same resources that we all seem to be competing on. Do you think that will become, I don't know, how it's just going to be? Are we repeating what we had in the past? Do you think the size of the institution adopting these things is going to be an enabler that trigger others to do it, or is it a hindrance, right? Because there are multiple ways of looking at this. I have a wonderful friend of mine who told me, well, yes, the bigger ones, they have access to resources and they have access to data. So theoretically speaking, they can afford to do a lot of things. But then they're also the ones, to your point earlier, silo data, right? The legacy that could bog them down. So it's like, I don't know.
Hmm.
It's a balance. It's a
Yeah.
balance. Um, Curious to see what you think about that.
My view on this is a little simplistic, Theo, and I've been speaking to so many different sizes of organizations over the last few years. We work with really early stage startups, which are like 3 or 4 people trying to build an AI solution, all the way up to like the JP Morgans and the cities and so on of the world. But I actually think size does not matter, age does not matter. My firm conclusion in all of this is what matters is the will in the organization of actually making that change happen and the change makers in that organization. You use that sentence, what matters is the people. If you have enough people within an organization, or not even enough people, not by numbers, but if you have at least 1 or 2 people who believe in it and who will do what it takes to pick up the flag of AI, jump over whatever hurdles are in their way, and just like keep going until they make it happen. I think that's the only thing it needs. So, to your point, yes, we have the JP Morgans and the Open AIs on one side, or even the Googles and the Microsofts on one side. But then we also have challenger banks like Bunk, for example, out of the Netherlands, or a wealth management firm called Kwood that are all based on AI, and they're doing a great job of using AI to better customer outcomes aligned with their whys in the beginning. Mistral, again, they're taking on OpenAI and Anthropic as a European LLM provider. They're about 100 people at this stage. So I honestly don't think size matters. I think what matters is that internal drive and will to just make it happen. Again,
I
like a very simplistic perspective on this, but I really don't think that size and resources and even like amounts of data is a prerequisite to AI success.
I loved your example in Bunk. I recently just sat through a session where they were talking about how they're using AI to uh, as a means to detect fraud.
Mm.
And that was fascinating, right? Leaving the rule space that we used to use and figuring out a new way, technology in the sense,
Yeah.
to counter new threats that we see in the ecosystem. And that is the perfect use case for it. And we know everyone is struggling with fraud problems. So that was brilliant. And I do love that example.
Yeah.
Um,
But Oak North Bank, for example, they're
mhm.
using AI for some brilliant credit underwriting and risk profile scoring and all of that. So I think Yeah. More organizations should just decide to do it rather than worrying about whether or not they have the size or the resources or the franchise or whatever. Just go ahead and start off.
All right. So we're going to end with a hopeful note. Let me ask you this. What gives you hope?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, what gives me hope is the number of people now who feel that they can make a change happen in their organizations. And this is really ironic, it's when chat gpt came on and all of us could use it in our personal lives and try our hands at ai. There was a lot of unnecessary hype created. There's a lot of completely silly expectations that are being generated, but the one thing that has happened is that there is more empowerment. Like, people feel, yes, I've used AI. My mother says she's used AI. And well, actually, that's a great thing because people are talking about it more, thinking about it more, figuring out what it can do for them more. And that wider understanding and awareness, even within FIs, is something that gives me hope, because it's only when you feel you can do more and only when you feel there are possibilities that you actually try getting to those possibilities. So this is kind of a little corny, but India had a prime minister um, when we were children, actually, quite a few years ago, called Atal Bihari Vajpayee. And he was a poet. And one of the things he said was, हम अगर सपने नहीं देखेंगे तो उन्हें साकार कैसे करेंगे, which means that if we don't dream, how can we even expect to achieve those dreams? And I think finally what has happened in the AI space is people are thinking about what more they can do. Banks are coming up with these ideas. I meet people at conferences. They come to me and they say, you know what, like, I would love to be able to do this and this with AI. Some of it might be completely far-fetched, but some of it is possible, and unless we start aiming towards that, it's not going to happen. And that desire, that aspiration, is definitely visible in the industry at the moment, and that gives me hope. I think there's just going to be more drive to make it happen, and I love that.
That that, my friend, is precisely why I thought you were one of the best speakers I've seen on the track, because I can feel that energy and the passion and the drive and the belief and enthusiasm and just a positive can do vibe that's coming across the screen. Let alone I actually witnessed it in person and seeing what we're going through in the world right now. I think we need a lot more of that. So for that, thank you. I appreciate you, and I hope that more people can get to actually hear your voice and get to know you. And thank you so much for spending time with us, Aditi. And for the rest of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of One Vision, the FinTech Fuse. We'll talk to you all next week.